our renowned geopolitical analyst in the house today, and it's no other person than the Nigerian award-winning journalist and investigative journalist. You all have been asking that you want to meet him on the Android community. He's a geopolitical analyst, the founder and the CEO of West African Weekly, a Substack newsletter, and he's a filmmaker. We are very happy to have him in the house today because he will be telling us a lot about this thing that we've been discussing on the Android community about the designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern by the United States President Donald Trump. So, Mr. David, please, what do you think about this designation, and more so the fact that the United States President actually called Nigeria a state of particular concern? And he didn't stop there. He made a statement that they are ready and they are willing and they are able to save their Nigerian Christian. You know, it was like our Christian. It was like honing the Christians in Nigeria. So I want you to give us what you think about this.
Well, first of all, he went a lot further than that. I don't know if you saw his more recent messages
So
where he said things along the lines of there is going to be military action any moment from now in Nigeria. So I guess the most important thing to understand about this is that regardless of whether they are Christians or Muslims or anything involved, is completely beside the point. The starting point of all of this is that the US government only takes actions that are in its own benefit. It is looking to benefit in some way from carrying out military action or military occupation of Nigeria. Now, what these things are that it stands to benefit have been analyzed to death. So I don't think I need to go through that all over again. How northern Nigeria is rich in rare earth minerals, which are the cause of this big geopolitical schism between the US and China right now, and how the world, whether everybody likes it or not, is being forced to pick a side. Now, lines are being drawn in the sand, and Nigeria is one of the unfortunate countries which has refused to pick a side. So it's having a side picked for it. So that's essentially what we're witnessing. An empire which is on its way down is doing the things that dying empires do. It's lashing out and looking for, searching desperately for any means with which it will remain dominant. One of those means is to seize the things that it considers to be the backbone of all present and future technology, such as rare earth minerals, oil, and other things like that. Then there are a plethora of reasons why Nigeria has that geostrategic value right now. And unfortunately, it seems as if everybody on the planet can see it except Nigerians themselves. Because Nigerians have this very fatuous notion that Nigeria is an island in the middle of nowhere, just hanging in the air without context. And it's not connected to the rest of the world. So what is happening in Nigeria somehow isn't relevant to what is happening in Gaza or the Philippines or wherever. Meanwhile, the whole world is one contiguous geopolitical entity, but we don't seem to get that. So essentially, you have a dying empire which is trying to seize resources and trying to assert itself in a very violent way. And the reason it's doing it in this very violent and unusual manner is that the ways that it has exercised power over the past 3 to 4 to 5 decades, they're all crumbling now. The international institutions through which it has wielded the power of an empire, institutions like the UN, the ICJ, the ICC, the World Bank, the IMF, all of which are basically US controlled or US government adjacent institutions, they have lost their legitimacy to a very large part, and they've also lost a lot of their power and their funding. So the US empire is finding new ways with which to assert itself. I guess the wider picture that people are not, well, let me not say people, the wider picture that Nigerians specifically don't seem to understand is that you can divide our geopolitical era into three. You can divide it into the pre-colonial and colonial era, where everything was done in the open. It was violent, it was messy, it was brutal. Everybody knew what the deal was, which was what led to independence movements, because everybody wanted to be free of colonialism. And then you had the post-colonial era, which is the era after independence, from independence till sometime around, I'll arbitrarily put it around 2020. right? Where the basic relationship between the so-called developed world and the so-called third world or global south didn't fundamentally change. However, the way that the power was exercised changed. So instead of just regular brute force and thuggery, which used to be the norm prior to that, it shifted and that power became exercised through global or international institutions, which are obviously dominated by the US government and institutions of the global north. Now, this process of breakdown, it didn't start in 2020, but I'm just arbitrarily putting it at 2020 because I think 2020 is the sort of bellwether point at which this decline became
Hmm.
completely visible to everybody. So let's peg it around 2020 as the time when the majority of the world no longer saw the need to be controlled by these things. And the primary reason why these institutions of empire lost their power in that way was because China had arisen. So for the first time in a generation, for the first time since the Soviet Union was a thing, the US government has what it calls a near peer or a peer adversary. It hadn't had that for the past 30 years. So it functioned almost basically unopposed as a global hegemon. Now there is China, which is not just a near peer or a peer. China, in many ways, is actually superior to the US. In terms of purchasing power parity, China already has an economy that is already 30% larger than that of the US. It's already the world's largest economy by quite some distance. Right? In terms of R&D, in terms of research, in terms of patents, in terms of new energy, in terms of rare earth refining, in terms of weaponry, China is way, 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 way ahead. In terms of shipbuilding, infrastructure, stock, all of those things, on all of those metrics, China is way ahead. So, what ordinarily should have happened is that China should have become the new hegemon, and the US should have accepted that it's a declining power. But the US, being the US, will never accept that it's a declining power or it's a number two power. It will always want to be the number one undisputed hegemon. So the next strategy is essentially to drag the whole world into war because it believes that the one place where it still maintains absolute advantage over everyone else is in warfare. The US has 800 military bases around the world, has by far the world's largest military budget by quite some distance. To put it into context, the military budget of the US is, I don't know, is it 6 or 7 times the cumulative annual budget of the entire continent of Africa?
Wow.
Government budget. That's how much US spends in a year on its military. So its idea for maintaining its hegemonic dominance is to leverage that military. So actions like this are just sort of the opening salvo. If you've been following the events in Venezuela, Nigeria and Venezuela are basically sharing the same story,
Hmm.
just different sides of the same story.
Yeah.
So in Venezuela's case, the U.S. government considers the, the
The drug.
administration of Nicolas Maduro to be a threat for several reasons, but primarily because Venezuela's control of the world's largest oil reserves, in some way, shape, or form, inevitably makes it a threat to the energy dominance of the U.S. in the Western Hemisphere. I'm sure you're aware of the so-called Monroe Doctrine, where the U.S. believes that it has unrestricted control and dominance over the Western Hemisphere. So if you're a country in the Western Hemisphere, the U.S. does not see you as sovereign because the U.S. believes that the Western Hemisphere is its domain.
Wow.
So if you are in that domain and you're sitting on the world's largest energy reserves, and you're calling yourself a socialist or whatever, automatically you've made yourself an enemy of that empire. So a basis has to be manufactured to stage a military invasion of your country to take over not just those oil reserves, but other natural resources which Venezuela has, including rare earths, by the way,
Wow.
because Venezuela is also blessed with a lot of these things. And you've seen people like the so-called Nobel Peace Prize winner, the Machado lady, the Venezuelan lady, who is basically a U.S.
Yeah.
puppet who has been going on TV saying, we need a
US.
military invasion of Venezuela so that U.S. corporations will make a lot of money because that's what the goal is here. Go in, seize all the state assets and natural resources, and license them to American companies so that American companies and by extension the U.S. state can feed fat off someone else's wealth, which is the entire basic model of empire. That's what an empire does, right? An empire isn't an empire because it produces or it's innovative. It's an empire because it co-opts the productivity of everybody else. It kidnaps everybody else's productivity and wealth for
Hmm.
itself. That's what makes it an empire. So that's what's going on in Venezuela. In Nigeria, it's not so much wanting to fight against an administration because the administration in Nigeria, as I'm sure you know, is fully owned lock, stock, and barrel by the US government already. However, the goal for Nigeria is a bit different. The goal isn't just to come in and take stuff and license stuff to US corporations, which already have access to these resources to some extent anyway. The goal in Nigeria is to completely dominate and to completely own. And the reason for that is Nigeria sits at a strategic choke point in Africa. Nigeria is the gateway to the Sahel, right? So Nigeria is one of the few West African countries where like half of the country is coastal West Africa, the other half is Sahelian West Africa. So Nigeria is the gateway to both the Atlantic region of West Africa and the Sahel region of West Africa. It's the biggest economy in the region, it's the most populous economy, the most populous country in the region, and the most influential country in the region. If you can exercise dominance, total dominance over Nigeria, then in a few years' time, the AES will cease to exist. Right.
Wow.
The AES, which is viewed as a strategic threat to US interests in the top half of Africa, primarily because, so for two reasons. First of all, because ideology goes against um,
Western.
the the idea of Western capitalism, which is that Africa must remain a place that supplies cheap natural resource inputs and nothing more. So all this talk about building infrastructure, building roads, building trade, aggregating trade into a free trade area, building factories to beneficiate their own resources. The US government does not want to hear that because that upsets their entire global economic model. So that's the one reason. The second reason, and perhaps the more important reason, is that the AES countries are allied with Russia and to a lesser extent
Yeah.
China. So the US government sees this as an existential battle between itself and what it considers to be a near peer adversary, which is
Hmm.
Russia in this case.
Hmm.
Uh, if you've been following the news over the past few weeks, you've been seeing news items such as the Russians announcing that they're going to be assisting the Nigerians and I believe the Burkinabes with nuclear reactors, like to build nuclear reactors in those countries. Those countries, bear in mind, are big suppliers of uranium to the global markets
Yes.
as well. So the calculation of the Trump administration is that if this is allowed to go unchecked, within a decade or so, these countries are going to get to the point where you're no longer going to be able to just topple them. They're going to become real countries. They're going to become real states with real state capacity. You know, most African countries are just like artificial. They don't really have power,
Yeah.
right? The typical African country, you can, if you have 5,000 men, you can take out the government in a typical African country with 5,000 fighting men because they lack capacity. Now,
Yeah.
what these three countries in the AES are doing is that they are building capacity to function as real countries, which is a problem from the point of view of those who believe that Africa has a specific role to play in the global economy, a role that it must not break out of. So, taking control of Nigeria, total control, not proxy control through a
Hmm.
puppet like Bola Tinubu, but total direct control would mean that you have direct access to the Sahel. Bear in mind that Nigeria has 1,000 kilometers of border with Niger alone, right? And then Nigeria obviously borders Benin,
Yes.
which also borders Niger, and I believe it borders Burkina Faso.
Okay. Also a little bit.
So from Nigeria, you essentially have unrestricted access to the Sahel. Now, when you have unrestricted access to the Sahel via Nigeria, something else that a lot of people are also sort of it does that people are not connecting is that the world's largest US consulate, where is it being constructed?
In Nigeria.
In Lagos. And
Hmm.
not just in Lagos, on the coast of Lagos. This is a consulate which is going to have access to the sea,
Hmm.
right? So all manner of this, so it's going to be one of the world's biggest CIA black sites, first of all, and all manner of things will be coming in and out, which you and I will have no access to. We will not know what is being brought in and out of our country, including weapons, including people, including equipment, all sorts of things. All of these things can be transported to the Sahel. Nigeria has a
Wow.
thousand kilometers of
Yeah.
border with the AES. So essentially, if this happens, if Nigeria's government is toppled, like as a going concern, and Nigeria becomes like the way Iraq was, the Northeast, where it was basically governed by an American military administrator. What that means is that Nigeria becomes a huge military base for these efforts to take back the Sahel on behalf of the US and France, right? And in the process, Nigeria stops being a country in any meaningful sense because up till today, Iraq is not a country in any meaningful sense. Iraq is
Yes.
still a very big US military base till today and will continue to be for decades, right? So again, I think we're well past the point of having to explain all of these things to people because I believe if you've been following the news, or if you have like the slightest bit of curiosity about how the world works, and you've just been following the news casually for the past even 18 months or so, you should already know all of this. This is all out there in the open. So I think right now, from a Nigerian point of view, because I'm speaking as a Nigerian right now, I think from a Nigerian point of view right now, what people need to be doing, if indeed there is something people can do about it, is that people need to be examining what alternative there is to a tenable government, right?
Yeah.
And when I say alternative, I'm not talking about election in 2027. I'm talking about what can happen in the short term to change the status quo. Because essentially, there is this kabuki theater production going on where the US government is pretending to be angry with the Tinubu government that it put in power. And
Yeah.
Tinubu government is pretending to be hapless. Oh, we don't know why you are saying this, and
Hmm.
but we are going to make our best efforts to blah blah blah. It's a huge production. Both sides are in on it, right? They're both
Yes, they are boy.
partnering on this project. They're both collaborating on this project. The
Yeah.
goal is for that unrestricted entry of US military presence into Nigeria. Bear in mind that for many, many decades, the US has been trying to cite permanent military presence in Nigeria. For
Yeah.
decades, since the 70s. They've been knocked back so many times. I believe the first request they made for US military base, for a permanent US military base in Nigeria, was sometime in the 70s, if I recall correctly. They were
Wow.
knocked back. Even in the 80s, even under Babangida, who is well known for being a CIA asset, even then, it was still knocked back because the political atmosphere was still such that that couldn't fly. Obviously, it was never going to fly under Abacha. It was, I believe it was in 2009 under Yaradua, that's when the latest attempt was made. The request was made to Yaradua's government to site a US military base in Nigeria in 2009. Yaradua said no. Within a year, he was dead, and Boko Haram had become a thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
since then, we've never had peace. Right. So what this would do is that this would give them all of the leverage that they're looking for
Wow.
to set
Wow.
up that permanent military presence in Nigeria, permanent US military presence in Nigeria. And once that happens, you and I just understand that we are citizens of a country that used to be called Nigeria, that we
Yes.
belong to a country that no longer exists. We're basically like Iraqis, right? We should understand that. So whoever might be watching this, whoever has access to any kind of power or influence or whatnot, I need them to understand that this is existential. This is not like everybody knows that if Bola Tinubu and I were to walk into an empty room together, only one of us is going to walk out of that room alive, right? And it won't be him. Everybody knows this. But we should also understand that right now it's not about whether you like Bola Ahmed Tinubu or not. That's
Yes.
completely beside the point, right? They own him anyway, so he's completely irrelevant. This is not
Hmm.
about him. This is not about wanting to preserve him in power or any rubbish like that. This is that there is something existential that is going on in your country right now. There's something which threatens the very continued corporate existence of your country. And whether or not you feel like your country is a good place or not is also completely beside the point. Whether Nigeria has happened to you before, no matter what bad experiences you have had in Nigeria, trust me, it can and it will get much worse.
Hmm.
So, because I've been seeing this meme flying around, this social meme flying around that, well, how even if the US were to stage a military invasion of Nigeria, how could it be worse? than what we currently have. Isn't Nigeria currently at war? Aren't people currently dying? So why would it be worse? We might as well try this if we're between the devil and the deep blue sea. You're
Hmm.
not between the devil and the deep blue sea. If you think the Nigeria you know is the devil, and the US government is the deep blue sea, then you are a pit of steaming lava. That's not the deep blue sea, bubbling lava. It's liquid, but it's not water, it's lava.
Hmm.
Right? However bad you think you have it now, it can and will get
Wow.
significantly worse. So
Wow.
you know, at this point, I'm probably flogging a dead horse. It's probably not going to make any difference. I'm probably just some guy yelling into the void on a Sunday afternoon on a YouTube live stream that like 100 people are watching. But well, as I told someone earlier today, even if none of us survives this, as petty as it sounds, right? If if at the point of death I can satisfy myself that well, I did everything I could. I put as much as I could out there. I tried as much as I could to educate people about the realities of what is facing them, and well, my best just wasn't good enough. Then I might die unhappy, but at least I'll die with a clear conscience. So there you go.
But I have a question, right? There are some Nigerians that are actually saying that they are treating this as if the Messiah is here. Now they are saying, "Oh, the United States have actually said this." Some people are making this look like it's some religious, escalation that needs to be attended to by the United States. Now they are saying they are giving Donald Trump the Messiah complex. Oh, the Messiah is here to save us. And strategically, we are seeing people that we've not seen before, like Mike Arnold, now doing a lot of posturing on the social media. You know, the US knows how to build narrative. And
Yes.
they've been building this. This has been in the build up for quite a while, and
Yes.
it's looking like something.
Yeah.
And with Eric Prince talking about the Pope financing the adventure in Nigeria, are we looking at a situation where there might be a boot on the ground in Nigeria anytime soon?
So from privileged information that I got access to this morning, the immediate plan isn't for boots on the ground, which is not to say that the plan is any better because the immediate plan apparently is for airstrikes
Wow.
on Nigeria. So apparently, U.S. Navy, what's it called, aircraft carriers in the Pacific are already repositioning for an imminent attack on Nigeria. Apparently, this has already been signed off on by the White
Wow.
House. So all these messages flying around by Rep. Thomas Massey and Donald Trump, this is all kabuki theater. It's already been agreed on. It's already been signed off on. So all this, hey, we're going to come to your country and do this. If this doesn't improve, it's bullshit. They're already going to do it, whether we say anything about it or not. Right? It's kabuki theater. So, by the way, for those who don't know, kabuki theater is a political term for when you carry out this posturing and theatrics to build a narrative. Meanwhile, your endpoint is already predetermined, and you're already going to do it regardless of what does or doesn't happen. It's called kabuki theater. So that's what this is. Um, so the immediate plan is for airstrikes on Nigeria. We don't know exactly where, and we don't know targeting who. But
Wow.
if history is any guide, where you have, especially with the Trump administration, where they've claimed to carry out airstrikes in Africa and in the Middle East and other places, who have those airstrikes targeted? For the most part, it's been ordinary civilians who have died.
Ordinary civilians, yes.
So they've been blowing up fishing boats in Venezuela and Colombia, claiming that oh, it's drug cartels shipping drugs. A tiny boat that needs to refuel 20 times. If it's to have any chance to get to LA, they'll say, oh, this boat was going from Venezuela to Miami or something. And four people on board, and it's ordinary fishermen, and they blew them up. Or what they did in Yemen, where they blew up a wedding circle and they said it was terrorists, and it was a group of people celebrating a freaking wedding, right? So if history is any guide, especially under a Trump administration, probably what's going to happen is, if we're lucky, they'll bomb a few civilians and Trump will posture about it and say he killed civilians. If we're lucky, if we're especially unfortunate, then we might be looking at a Libya type of situation where, because because again, I feel like the Libya story was never told well enough. So I feel like a lot of us don't even understand what even happened in Libya. Most of us still think that what happened in Libya was that Muammar Gaddafi was taken out and he was killed. That's literally the smallest part of what happened.
Hmm.
So what actually happened in Libya was that over the course of 8 months, these people flew 7,000 bombing missions into Libya. 7,000. I didn't say they dropped 7,000 bombs. I said they flew 7,000 bombing missions. Each mission, each sortie can carry dozens of bombs, right? So 7,000 bombing missions over 8 months. And what did they bomb in Libya? They bombed factories, they bombed roads, they bombed bridges, they bombed railway lines, they bombed the Great Man-Made River Project. So for those who don't know what the Great Man-Made River Project is, if you study geography in school, you know that once upon a time the Sahara used to be a shallow ocean. So deep under the Sahara, which is like the driest place in the world now, deep, deep, deep under kilometers under the Sahara, there are huge aquifers of fresh water. When I say huge, so huge that they contain more fresh water than even the Great Lakes in the eastern region of Africa, which are the greatest freshwater lakes in the world. There are bigger freshwater sources under the Sahara. So the Great Man-Made River Project, which was conceived under Gaddafi, was essentially to pump that what's it called, that fossil water from underground where it's not being used to the surface, so that essentially you can regreen a large part of the Sahara. I don't think I need to tell you how transformational that would have been for the economy, for the ecology of the entire northern half of Africa, right? And they had already started building this. Some places had already started pumping water. Like there was already the first parts of the Great Mermaid River project. And these people came and carefully bombed everything back to the Stone Age, right? So what was done to Libya wasn't just regime change. It wasn't just about getting rid of somebody they didn't like. It was a very strategic and
Destruct.
successful effort to get rid of any ability to generate or create wealth in Africa. Anything that is going to have a negative impact on poverty in Africa, anything that's going to reduce poverty in Africa, they bombed it out. That was what happened in Libya. So if we're especially unfortunate, that's what they will do here. That's what they do in Nigeria. So there's some strategic infrastructure, some of which we don't even realize how significant it is, actually considered to be a threat, such as the new refinery, for example, right?
The
It's considered to be, yeah,
Dangote.
the Dangote refinery. It's considered to be something which is basically upsetting the global economic apple cart. I don't know if you saw a news item earlier in the year that the the US had become the largest supplier of crude oil to the
Yeah.
Dangote refinery. Now, what people didn't understand how significant that was that for like 500 years or so, the entire economic relationship between Africa and the Western world or the global North has been that Africa is the source of the raw materials, and the global North or Asia is where those things are beneficiated and is where the
Yes.
real economic value is captured. Now, you have this crazy Nigerian billionaire who has built a refinery, and now the US is now supplying the raw material to Nigeria, and then the majority of the economic value is now being captured in
Hmm.
Lagos by some Nigerian guy. That's already bad enough. And then what makes that even worse is that the refineries in places like Rotterdam are already reporting that their businesses are suffering as a direct result of this guy's mega refinery. And as if that's not bad enough, this guy then comes and says this refinery, which is already the largest single train refinery in the world, that he's going to upgrade it from 600,000 to 1.2 million barrels a day, and
Yeah.
it's going to become the largest refinery in the world, period. Which would essentially destroy the European refining industry and would completely upturn the economic balance of power in the fossil fuels industry in Africa. So if they're looking at it from that perspective, that this has the potential, the same way the Great Man-Made River project in Libya had the potential to suck in wealth and create wealth and reduce poverty in that area. So this thing is something that needs to be got rid of. So if we're unfortunate, that's simply what they'll do. They'll go bomb the refinery back to the Stone Age and claim that, oh, this was infrastructure that was being used to support terrorism or something. That's what they did in Libya. So again, maybe it's also a failure of people like you and I that,
Somebody asked me this same question.
yeah, over the years, maybe we haven't told this story well enough. So I feel like if our contemporaries across Nigeria, all the people on Twitter saying all the rubbish that they're saying, if the story of Libya had been told to them properly, because they really still don't understand, even till now, as we're speaking, they have no idea what happened in Libya and what it has to do with them. They have no idea. Like there's about 100 million Nigerians walking around whose heads are like blank slates. They don't know their place in the world. They don't know anything. Completely ignorant people. And I feel like if people like you and I had done a better job of educating the public, I feel like maybe we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because if people knew that this is what has been done in Libya, which is two borders away from Nigeria, you can
Yes,
literally go
yes,
Adabawa, Chad, Libya. It's
yes,
two borders away from Nigeria. And
yes,
this is what was done. This used to be by far Africa's wealthiest country. Now it's not even a country anymore.
yes. It's not. It's not.
You know, if people understood that, then no way would people be saying things like, "Oh well, let them come in. After all, it can't be worse than what we already have. Nigeria needs to end," and all the rubbish that people have been saying. It comes from a place of ignorance, and honestly, maybe at this point, I guess it's too late to be beating ourselves up about it. But I feel like if this thing happened in 2011 and we're in 2025, which is 14 years later, and the lesson hasn't sunk in after 14 years, then I don't know.
So we have another question, right? About, because most of the Nigerian military capabilities they procure from the United States. Like there was a particular time there was a Russian helicopter that was procured, and now they've now referred,
MI17.
yes, procuring United States weapons. And most of the time I've even met personally some US instructors in Nigeria that are in charge of some of the military training and weapon training and all of that, maintenance agreement by the United States and all of that. So there is a question that is, the US provides this capability to Nigeria. They know how capable Nigeria is against this particular threat we are talking about. So the question is it the lack of capability on the side of the Nigerian army to face the threat that is before them that is now bringing up this conversation of genocide? Even if you and I know that there is genocide, for like Nigeria is being faced by this threat equally, but there are claims that it's against the Christian. Okay, fine. If that is what they claim that is going on in Nigeria. So apart from that, the question is that, is there something the US know that the Nigerian government does not know about? Or is it a failure on the side of the political bigwigs in Nigeria to take decisive step to enable the military to be able to fight this threat at a very, very good level? What do you think?
I think first of all, if there's the most basic concept of sovereignty, or what it means to be a sovereign country in Nigeria, then whether it's this way or it's that way, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. Because
Yes.
how is it the U.S. government's business what is or is not happening in Nigeria,
Mm-hmm.
right? What if the Nigerian government started putting out statements about how the U.S. treats black people
Hmm.
in the U.S.? You know, I used to work with African Stream, and you saw what was done to African Stream, and
Yeah. Yeah.
a large part of the reason why they came after us with the
Yes.
ferocity that they did was because they claimed that we involved ourselves in domestic U.S. politics because we spoke about issues regarding African American populations in the U.S. Because obviously we consider African Americans to be Africans as well.
Hmm.
They've been in the US for generations, but they're still
Yeah.
African and they're
Yes.
still part of the global black conversation. And we weren't just covering Africa, we were covering the global Africa, as we call it. So that's Africa, the Caribbeans, South America, and North America. And they claimed that we were involving ourselves in US politics, therefore we were a Russian influence operation.
Yeah. They said it was Russia.
Essentially that it's not our business, that we're a bunch of people in Nairobi, Kenya. So why the hell are we talking about what's happening in the US? How is it our business? So using that exact same standard that was used to deplatform us to hell, why on earth is it the US government's business what is or is not happening in Nigeria? Why does it concern them? Let's say for the sake of arguments, you and I know this is bullshit, but let's say for the sake of argument, there is this incredibly, there's this focused attempt to like wipe out a specific religion from Nigeria via genocide, right? Even though mathematically it's impossible, Nigeria is almost evenly split between Christians and Muslims. The idea is
Yes.
retarded. But let's
Yes.
say, for the sake of argument, that were to be the case. If this were happening, say in Minnesota or in Arkansas, would anyone be having anything to say about it? We just be like, oh well, there's internal crisis in the US, and it would be like everyone is watching a movie, but it wouldn't occur to anyone that we need to go intervene
Yes.
in
Yes.
that. So where does this idea come from that the US government has some sort of assumed right to roll up into somebody else's country and claim that because of some Christian or whatnot? What was being done in Gaza for like 3 years? Who intervened?
Hmm. Even in Sudan.
Yeah. Who is intervening in Sudan? Black Africans are being targeted, as a result of their ethnicity,
Hmm.
right? So at least you can choose to be a Christian or a Muslim, whatever. You cannot choose whether or not you're a Black African. You just are,
Yeah.
right? You can't choose your ethnicity and culture, can you?
Mm-hmm.
You are born into it, and those people. So it makes it even a worse issue as far as genocide is concerned, and even religion. Those people are being targeted, and this has been going on since 2023. Who has intervened in Sudan? In the city of El Fasher right now, we've been following the atrocities going on. Everybody knows the guy's name. He's become a global sensation. The guy that calls himself
Yeah.
Abulolo and the things
Absolutely.
he's been doing. Like he was it 5,000 people that he was responsible for murdering, and he showed off. It was he has been doing TikTok lives and all that.
Yeah.
Who is intervening? But somehow there's this unspoken, unheard of thing from their perspective anyway in Nigeria, and all of a sudden these people who cannot find Nigeria on a map,
Hmm.
everybody suddenly cares. And then there's all this talk about, we have to save our Christian brothers. And at the same time, they're supposedly saving the Nigerian Christian brothers. The quotas, the annual US government quotas for refugees, that quota has been slashed by 95%, and the majority
Wow.
of it has been allocated to white South Africans. It has been stated like a racially exclusive policy of Donald Trump that
Wow.
the majority of the refugee quota of the US now annually is reserved for white South Africans, many of whom are not even Christian. Some of them are atheists, some of them are Jews, and other things. So, if that is the case, then since when did Trump care about some black Nigerians who are calling themselves Christians somewhere? Since when did Trump care? Since when did Eric Prince care? Since when did what's his name Marco Rubio care? Since when did Thomas Massey care?
Yeah.
You know, what's that? Since when did JD Vance care? These guys are all open. Ted Cruz. These guys are white supremacists, and it's not even a secret. They don't even make any attempt to hide it. So if a bunch of white supremacists are on your side in any issue, you should very carefully examine why you are on that side.
Hmm.
Because chances are, whatever side of an issue that they're on, there's a very good chance it's the wrong side of history.
Hmm.
And
So
then
what?
also, just to mention, going back to what you were saying about weapons, um, this is just like a random throwaway observation that um, part of the reason why 2015 was such a tragedy for Nigeria, that regime change that took place in 2015, part of the reason it was such a tragedy for Nigeria was that switch that you mentioned about going back to buy American equipment. That happened after 2015. In the run up to 2015, in the fight against Boko Haram and all the things that happened there, the Jonathan government had realized that these Americans are not our friends.
Hmm.
These guys are actually trying to sabotage what we're trying to do here. And these guys have a completely different agenda to whatever it is that they claim publicly that their agenda is. They had realized it, which is why the pivot toward Russia and China had begun. Now, so if you recall, that was when the deal was initially signed that as part of efforts to modernize the Nigerian Air Force, that a squadron of GF-17 Thunders was going to be delivered.
Hmm.
I don't know if you recall that. The GF-17 is basically it's an export version of it's a GS that is built by the Pakistani Air Force, but it's licensed from China. So it's a Chinese Air Force design. I think it's called the CF-17 in China, but it's manufactured under license in Pakistan as the JF-17. Now, the deal which had been agreed under the Jonathan government was that Nigeria was going to receive a squadron of 40 JF-17, JF-17 Thunder aircraft, which were fourth generation fighter jets. Bear in mind that up until now, Nigeria doesn't have a single squadron of fourth generation fighter aircraft. Nigeria is still
Wow.
using Chengdu F-7s, which are third generation at best. Right? Even the Chinese, who made the Chengdu F-7, don't even use it anymore. The Chengdu F-7 is not even used as a trainer aircraft in China anymore.
Wow.
Right? The Chinese Air Force doesn't even use it anymore. But that's the flagship of the Nigerian Air Force up till now as we speak is the Chengdu F-7, which was bought in 2006 under Obasanjo. So that attempt to modernize the Nigerian Air Force, it was supposed to, this was going to be game changing. And as soon as Buhari was brought into power, that was one of the very first deals that was scuttled. Because in addition to buying those 40 JF-17s, part of the deal was also that the Pakistanis would set up an assembly line, a production line in Nigeria. So that in addition to just buying the things, the spares and repairs, you
Yes.
can basically do everything in-house.
In Nigeria.
Which, and the importance of that is that it makes your weapons sanctions proof.
Hmm.
So if somebody imposes an arms embargo or sanctions, whatever, on you, it doesn't matter because you manufacture the supply chain that keeps everything
Within.
running is domiciled in-house, which is a big problem that Nigeria had in 2014, if you recall, when attempts were being made to fight Boko Haram and then equipment was breaking down, you couldn't
Yes.
service it because the US government imposed an arms embargo, which is
Yes.
not just an embargo on selling arms, it's also an embargo on selling spare parts, engines, machinery to you, right? So that was what this deal and others like it were supposed to circumvent. And as soon as Buhari came in, all these things were scuttled. The next thing you knew, started hearing talk about buying turboprop, super Tucano,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's like you were about to drink champagne, and now somebody is giving you apple juice and is telling you that this is the best thing ever. That's exactly what happened. And what makes it worse is that in addition to the downgrade and the lack of capacity that you get from buying US weapons, because the US will never sell you their best stuff, especially if you're an African country. They will sell you their downgraded junk from 20 years ago,
Yes.
right? So I believe in the whole of Africa, it's just like 5 or 6 countries that even have F-16s. The F-16 was developed in the 1970s.
Wow.
And up till now, as far as the US government is never going to supply Nigeria with F-16s. How? The US government, the US Air Force no longer relies on F-16s. Now it uses F-22s and F-35s. It's moved on. But even that F-16, it's not going to give you because that's still some real capacity. It doesn't want you to have it. So they will sell you their downgraded, old, ancient junk that is useless. And then, much more dangerously, what they also do is that all the equipment that they sell to you, especially if it's things like aircraft and whatnot, missiles, things like that. Everything is coded. Every time you want to use it, you need an access code.
They have a
It has
second.
to come from
Yeah.
the what's it called?
The
From
Pentagon.
the DoD, right? They have to like so if you're going to fly a training mission, like, you need codes. So if
Access.
you buy like an F-16 from the US and the US government decides that it doesn't want you to fly that F-16, your $40 million purchase becomes an expensive piece of scrap metal on the runway.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, from that perspective, it's the dumbest thing in the world for an African country searching for sovereignty to buy military equipment from any NATO country. It just seems like a very, very
Yeah.
unintelligent thing to do. But when you then look at it from the angle of, well, it wasn't a choice that Nigeria made. It was a choice that was imposed on Nigeria because the regime change that happened in 2015 wasn't an organic regime change. So when you look at it that way, then you start to understand that even the things we are witnessing now, today, with Trump, these things didn't start under Trump. There are several ducks that have been laid in a row, and it encompasses both Republican and Democrat administrations. So whether it's Obama, whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump, certain things have not changed because as they say, parties can change in the US, but policy remains constant. It doesn't
Yes.
change. So that's kind of where we are.
So, is there a way? Is there a way for Nigeria to get out of this situation? Is there a way?
So I'm going to stop short of saying something that is going to get your YouTube video flagged by the DSS so that you get a knock on your door and someone will say you're calling for insurrection or so whatnot. I'm going to
Okay.
stop short of saying that.
Okay.
However, what I will say is that ultimately sovereignty always belongs to the people in a country. So a country isn't a country because it has a constitution or because it has paraphernalia of state or because it has an Aso Rock and National Assembly. A country is a country because of its people.
Yes.
So if the Nigerian people, which obviously, saying this now, I kind of appreciate even how ridiculous it sounds because,
No,
I mean,
it's
who
not.
are we kidding? The Nigerian people are not, they're not in that place right now. They're just not. But ideally, if they were, this would be the time when some certain conversations will be need to have certain conversations now. Conversations like if we're at the point now that a foreign power is threatening overt aggression and we have a government which is shadow boxing and pretending not to know what's going on. Meanwhile, we all know that they're in bed together.
Yeah.
Then why do we even need this government in the first place? Which
Hmm.
is why I tweeted something earlier today. I'm not going to repeat the tweet here again so it doesn't get your video, it doesn't your video doesn't get into trouble. But for anyone who is interested, I tweeted something earlier today where I basically said some certain group of people who have a certain type of power, this is the time for them to do something if they're ever going to do something. Because if they don't do something now, and Mr. Rock and Mr. Trump continue this kabuki theater thing that they're doing, and obviously going with the information that I got this morning that airstrikes have already been authorized,
Hmm.
if and when those things happen, we are going to wake up and those people who have that certain power are going to wake up and realize they no longer have that power or they're dead.
Wow.
So right now, every Nigerian who has access to power or who has any type of power, I'm not going to specify what, any type of power, whatever it is, real large scale power, examines they can now to change this status quo in terms of who is in power right now. Because ultimately, none of this would have been possible if there weren't a marionette who was masquerading as president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, right? There have been several presidents that Nigeria has had whom you would consider to be subpar for different reasons. But there has never been a president that it has been so clear that this person is jelly, this person is plasticine in the hands of the US State Department that they can do anything that they want. They can disrespect him in any way they want. They can disrespect his country, our country, in any way they want without any consequence whatsoever because they know fully well that this is a lame duck.
Hmm.
That has never happened. It didn't happen with good luck. It didn't even happen with Buhari, as terrible as it was. It didn't happen even with Babangida, who was like, it definitely didn't happen with Abacha, obviously. Not even Shehu Shagari, who had a reputation for being completely useless. It didn't happen with him either. This is the first time in Nigeria's independence history that it's been so clear that this nation, this potentially great nation of 230 million people,
Wow.
seventh or is it eighth most populous country in the world, very, very globally significant country, is being treated as if it's Lesotho or Eswatini, right? And he can't. Trump wouldn't make those kind of threats against. Let me think of Nigeria's in terms of population. Nigeria's contemporary globally: Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil,
No, it won't.
uh,
Won't.
Malaysia. Trump wouldn't do that because even though those countries are not at the top level, those countries are at a level where you can't really f with them that way. You can't. You simply can't. It's suicidal to do it, right? They might not have nuclear weapons or whatever, but their response will be significant and it can hurt you. But Nigeria is being treated like which should be, if you recall, just 10 years ago, Nigeria was like literally classed as part of a new development bloc alongside Mexico, Indonesia, and Turkey. It was called MINT. Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey. Nigeria was in that band of countries globally just 10 years ago. And now Nigeria has been, spoken about as if it's
If it's
Belize,
yeah.
you know, 230 million people. A country that as recently as 10 years ago was approaching $750 billion of GDP.
Wow.
And now it's just, you know, it's being spoken about as if it's one random, it's Yemen or something. This is Nigeria that we're talking about, you know. And the only reason this is happening is because there's a certain person who was allowed to take power.
Hmm.
Regardless of whether we know who put him in power and why, we know who is responsible for him being in power. But regardless of who wanted him in power, the Nigerian establishment still had the opportunity to insist that this person cannot be allowed to sit on our president. It has happened before when the original Bola Tinubu, you know who I'm referring to, MQ Abiola,
Yes.
when he tried to do this, the establishment of that time said no,
Wow.
you cannot sit on that seat.
Hmm.
Someone like you cannot sit on that seat because we know who owns you. They obviously knew who owned MKO. MKO was a CIA asset,
Hmm.
the same as his friend Babangida. Which is why he was so convinced that he was going to be president. Obviously, he was going to be president. But the establishment of that time in Nigeria still had enough self-respect that they said, no, this seat cannot be for someone like you. No matter how terrible Nigerian leadership is, no matter how awful we are, even though we're, most of the leadership class is made up
Yes.
of, civil war criminals. But that be that as it may, we still have some certain measure of respect
Yes.
for the idea of being a sovereign country. So someone like you cannot sit on this seat, and the man never sat on that seat, to their credit. But Tinubu was able to come in,
Okay.
occupy the seats, and he's been there for how many years now?
I think,
This is the second year to
yeah,
get,
third.
and nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. Even the military. Obviously, we knew that the military has been weakened for decades,
Okay.
especially under Obasanjo. We know it was state policy to weaken the military. But be that as it may, when you understand that a foreign power is doing this to your country, I would think that as a lower to mid-level officer, there's a certain amount of pride in your own profession and in because at the end of the day, you should understand that if this foreign power is allowed to get away with what it's doing, it's your own life that is going to be sacrificed. You are the one who's going to die a very useless death for nothing.
Hmm. That's
When
true.
this foreign Yeah, when your government is shadow boxing with terrorists,
Hmm.
which it knows very well that its foreign benefactor is the one behind them, so it cannot really fight them too hard. But it occasionally has to do something to get a headline. It's you that it will send
Yeah.
to go and die a very useless death,
Mm-hmm.
and then it won't take care of your it won't take care of your children and your widow afterwards and all of that. So I would have thought that from that point of view, they would have been like, you know what? If we're going to die anyway, we might as well make our death a meaningful one. But they're not doing that. Instead, over the past couple of years, I get messages from soldiers complaining that our salaries have not been paid, and very very banal stuff. Oh yeah, we've not had promotion exercise in 2 years. Oh, this one, soldiers acting like they're civil servants so that they can be seizing trucks of rice.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
and like you are supposed to be thinking in terms of how can I become so powerful that I can affect the affairs of this country? How can I
Hmm.
become so powerful that I can stand side to side with Ibrahim Traore as my contemporary,
Yeah.
as my brother in arms? You're not, it's how to kidnap bags of rice and stuff. Really? Yeah, so, I
So
mean,
what?
I'm not very hopeful. I'm not very hopeful about the military,
Okay.
but just on the off chance, you know what? Let me just not say that again, not to put you in trouble, but
Okay.
let's just say that whoever has the power to affect this situation and isn't using that power right now, history is not going to look back on. History is not going to pass a favorable verdict on you. So let's just leave it at that.
There was an alleged coup d'état recently in Nigeria. Some hours to the protest that was supposed to go down, and still till now they are still talking about the coup d'état and some officers that were involved and all of that. Was that coup really? Was it really a real coup d'état or just? a makeup, paint up job.
Short answer.
Yeah.
Short answer, no, it wasn't. And the reason is very, very simple. If you read the stories that were put out about it, it's a claim was repeated across all these stories. The claim was that the soldiers supposedly involved in this coup, that the majority of them were attached to the National Security Advisor's office. So first of all, that tells me that A, this is an attempt to set up Nuhu Ribadu, or at least to weaken his position,
Hmm.
right? So, because it means either he was in on it or he's incompetent. Because this kind of thing was happening under his nose and he wasn't aware. So already Nuhu Ribadu has been he's quarter to gone. That's the first thing. So you can tell there's a political angle behind it. Secondly, and more importantly, the the entity that supposedly discovered or investigated this thing was the DIA. Please tell me from your knowledge of the Nigerian government organogram, which one is higher, the NSA or the DIA?
The NSA is higher.
The NSA is literally the DIA's boss. Are you
Yeah.
saying the DIA investigated the NSA?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
total bullshit.
Hmm.
Story, case closed.
So thank you for coming today. We really, really enjoyed this session. We were really, really, we gained a lot from this, and we are happy to have you around. So where can the people follow you? And on Twitter, on X, on Instagram, on YouTube, where can we follow you?
Okay, so you can follow me individually at David Hundeyin on Twitter. On YouTube, I'm at Hundeyin. On Instagram, I'm at David Hundeyin.
Okay.
On TikTok, I don't use TikTok very often, but I'm David I Hundeyin on TikTok.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't use Facebook at all. I have a Facebook presence, but I don't use it. And that's pretty much it. You can also follow a media organization that I
Okay.
set up recently. It's called the Spearhead. So it's at Spearhead underscore AF. That's Spearhead Africa. So
Okay.
at Spearhead underscore AF on Twitter, on Instagram, on Threads, on all those places. Yeah, that's
Okay.
it.
So I would personally try to get this information so that I can share it with the followers on my platform, because they've always demanded that I bring David Undeyi to the show. So we are so happy to have you. I know a lot of them are going to come back from work and they are going to see what you said so far, which is very, very insightful, and will find it very nourishing. Thank you so much. We would like to have you once again on the show. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.